Chapter 8. Les wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve. He couldn't remember the last time he had sweat so badly. He drove his shovel into the ground, wanting the hole much deeper than it had to be. He didn't want anyone finding Marco's head. Ever. He looked back at the head. It was in a black garbage bag. After he buried it, there was still the matter of cleaning the blood in the fridge. He looked back to the house, where Michael was more than likely going through Les's stuff. "I wish you'd never been born, Michael. I don't care what you are." "Careful now," a voice said from the darkness. "That's my brother you're speaking ill about." Les nearly emptied his bladder. He looked around frantically, but couldn't find the source of the voice. "Who's there?" Suddenly he saw a figure in the darkness moving toward him. Les's heart hammered so hard in his chest that he felt lightheaded. The figure finally made it into the light of the moon so Les could see him. It was a young man, dressed nicely in a black suit with a red tie. He had short, blonde hair. "Michael can be a little aggressive," the figure said, looking at the garbage bag. "But he's a good boy once you get to know him." "You're his brother?" Les asked nervously. "That I am." Les became even more nervous. The figure smiled. "You can call me Jason." Jason spoke very politely. That didn't put Les at ease very much. "Pleasure to meet you," said Les. Then he bowed. Jason laughed and bowed his own head. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, "but I just stopped by to give my brother something. He's going to need it on his quest. It helps him think, so to speak." Les realized Jason was holding what looked like a brown bowling ball bag. "His quest? You mean the person he's looking for?" "Exactly. My brother tends to be a little hasty, and when beginning his search, he left an important item behind." Jason set the bag down by the hole Les had dug. "What is it?" Les asked. "I suppose, since you're courteous enough to help Michael, I can tell you. It's a device, one I need to use but don't have the means to operate. I believe the person we're looking for can operate it." "What does it do?" Les asked. Jason smiled. "You're very curious. I like that. However, I cannot tell you what it does. Not because I don't know, but because it's a secret. Life is full of secrets, isn't it? That's what makes it so interesting. You can understand, can't you?" "Yes, sir," Les said. Jason laughed. He grabbed the bag with Marco's head and dropped it into the hole. "This is a fine hole you've dug. I think it will do just fine." "Would you like to come in and say hi?" Les asked, indicating his house. "No, I mustn't. I don't want to distract Michael from his task." "He was already reluctant to begin in the first place," Jason said, shaking his head. "If he sees me, he'll beg me to come back home, and what I have charged him with must be done. Tell him to take care of the device. I would hold on to it myself, but Michael needs it more than I." "Your brother killed this guy," Les said hastily, pointing to the bag in the hole. "I figured he would. I told him to do whatever it takes to get the job done. It's nice to see he's listening." "But," Les said, utterly shocked, "he didn't have to kill this guy. Michael only did it because the guy got on his nerves." Jason shrugged his shoulders and said, "Boys will be boys, you know." Les couldn't believe it. He was surrounded by crazy people. These brothers looked at murder as a minor thing. Suddenly he was aware Jason was no longer standing next to him. Les turned and saw him returning to where he had come from. "What are you doing?" Les asked. "Retreating into the darkness, of course," Jason replied, and it seemed he was doing just that, for he disappeared before Les's very eyes, in the corner of his yard where the darkness was absolute. Les went back to his room and found Michael holding a sack full of purple crystals. "What are these?" Michael asked. "Damn it," Les thought. "I knew he'd go through my stuff." "Barghani crystals," he said. "I used them to protect myself from evil spirits." Michael laughed and put them back in Les's desk drawer. That's when Les handed him the bag Jason had given him. "This is for you." Michael stared at the bag for a moment, then took it. He opened it slowly and pulled out what looked like a dark red bowling ball, only it didn't have finger holes. For a long while, he just stared at it, not saying a word. "My brother was here?" he finally asked Les. "Yeah." Les became more nervous as Michael sat there at his desk, staring at the strange ball, its dark, shiny red surface barely reflecting anything around it. "So, you don't know how to use that thing?" Les asked. "It's weird. I have a faint idea of how to use it," Michael responded. "I just can't actually use it." "That must be frustrating." "Very." Michael noticed a Rubik's Cube sitting on Les's desk. He put down the ball, picked up the cube, and started playing with it. An awkward silence followed. "Why did you say what you said to Curtis at the arcade?" Les suddenly asked, breaking the silence and changing the subject at the same time. Michael continued to play with the cube. "As soon as I met him, the thought just came to mind." "You're not racist, are you?" Michael laughed at that. "No, it's not like that. I can sense things about people when I'm near them. I could sense some friction between you two." He set down the cube, with all colored sides matching. "Could you really sense something from me?" Les asked. "Clear as day, my friend." Michael went back to the ball, studying it. Les looked at the Rubik's Cube again. "You must be really smart. I've been working on that cube for years." Michael didn't respond. "So," Les said, "you and your brother are looking for someone to help you activate the ball. To do what?" Michael finally looked up from the orb and stared at Les, his eyes suddenly alive. "Before I tell you, you have to promise you'll still help me, no matter what." Les didn't like that. There was no way he was going to make a promise to something if he didn't know what it was first. "I promise," he said, hating himself for it. "I know what this thing does, but not how to use it. My brother plans to enslave the human race and take over the world." Les sat suddenly on his bed, many thoughts running through his head now. And then, he laughed uncontrollably. Michael smiled. "You're joking, right?" Les asked. "No, I'm serious. I'm certain this orb can help us do that. I told my brother, and he came up with the plan to use it." "How do you know what it does?" Les asked. "I saw it in a dream. I saw me and another person building it at the same time. We were in a green room, surrounded by creatures in cages. I don't know what the other person looks like, but I know he or she is here in this city. There's a link between us." Les listened intently. He could tell by Michael's tone he was indeed serious. About everything. "It can do other things, too," Michael said with a grin. "The orb, I mean. Terrible things." "What?" Les asked. "You don't want to know." "How did you get this?" Les asked. "I don't know. It just came to us." Michael seemed at a loss for words now. He sat there, staring at the orb again. "You said you and your brother are planning to take over the world?" Les asked. "He's planning it, not me," said Michael. "But why?" "Are you telling me if you had the chance to take over the world, you wouldn't seize it?" Michael asked. Les didn't want to answer that question. What about me? Am I going to be a slave too? I'll take care of you. You make it sound like you don't want any part of this plan. If that's true, then just don't do it. Les got up from the bed and grabbed the orb from Michael. Just destroy it. I can't, Michael said. I have to do this. Why? Because he told me to, said Michael. My brother said it was the only way to make things right. The orb was warm in Les's hand. Michael stared at him, his eyes suddenly full of rage. Les slowly handed the orb back to him. Thank you, Michael said silently. Les hated the way the orb felt in his hands. It had seemed slimy, yet his hands were dry. It felt warm and evil. He could feel it in his body now. Now, back to the other matter, Michael suddenly said, making Les jump. We have to find the one who can activate it. Do you think you would know them if you saw them? Les asked. I would probably sense them, yes. I can take you to some places where a lot of people go. We could see if you pick up anything. Michael considered this. Les already regretted bringing it up. The thought of taking this guy out in public was scary. Anything could happen. Sounds like a good idea, Michael said. But first, I need a nap. Michael lay down on Les's bed and was instantly asleep. Jason loved his brother and would do almost anything for him. But at the moment, he was mad at Michael. The way he just disappeared from the hotel like that was completely irresponsible. Standing at Les's window, he watched through the blinds as the portly boy handed the orb to Michael. Jason hadn't doubted Les would do what was asked of him, but he decided to make sure the task had been done properly. Eventually, Jason would have to talk to Michael. Now did not seem to be the proper time, though Jason wanted his brother to realize what he'd done was wrong. He wanted Michael to feel he had shamed his older brother by wandering off when they had something important to do. As Jason stood there, staring at his baby brother through the window, he was reminded of how they had been driven from their home like they were monsters. The brothers had been shunned because of their birth parents, more specifically, their father. The townspeople had discovered Jason and Michael were the sons of him, the beast with orange eyes, as people had come to call Father, who'd almost taken over the world. Jason hadn't known at the time what his father really was. He had vague memories of life with his natural parents before being adopted. That soon changed when, one night, a man came to Jason and told him the truth. At first, he had thought the man to be a dream or a ghost. Jason had only been a child at the time. For a while, the man visited Jason and Michael, telling them tales of fantastical worlds and creatures. They were bedtime stories the Fosters never told. The two boys had loved those stories. And then he revealed his true identity to the brothers. If you're our daddy, Michael said, why can't we live with you? Because, said their father, it's not safe just yet. But soon we'll be together. We'll be a family. You live in a world that hates me, though they should love me. After all, I'm the reason they're all here. Jason remembered his father's orange eyes and long brown hair, pulled back in a ponytail. Jason had been 15 when his dad last visited and told them he wouldn't be able to see them for a while. But he promised his children they would be together soon, that he was planning something big. He told them the world would pay for its betrayal. Jason hadn't understood at the time what his father meant, but he did now. Years later, Michael had come across something in a field. The 17-year-old showed it to Jason. It was a ship of some kind. After examining the strange round ship in the field, Jason and Michael managed to open it. The inside was fairly large, with blue-silver seats all around. There had been a jar on the floor with a strange mist swirling inside. Michael had gotten to the jar first. He picked it up and studied it. "Let me see," Jason said, and when Michael tried to hand it over, the jar slipped from his hands, smashing on the floor. The mist had climbed up to Michael's face and seeped into his nose and mouth. And then he collapsed. Whatever had been in that jar put poor Michael in a coma for months. Jason did his best to care for him, considering they were on the run for their lives. It was during those months Jason had found out about the orb. Michael, in his comatose state, began mumbling something about the orb and the power it contained. Jason didn't know what to think or say to this. Even though Michael was talking, nothing about his condition had changed. But Jason never gave up hope. He continued to care for his little brother the best he could. Whenever Michael whispered about the orb and its power, Jason listened. "Where is the orb?" Jason finally asked, not knowing what else to do. "The ship," Michael replied. "The ship." Of course, Jason thought. After Michael had collapsed, Jason had immediately taken him to an abandoned house nearby. After making sure Michael was safe, Jason returned to the field, but the ship was gone. There had been an indentation in the grass, but no ship. Shortly after, Jason returned to the field, not knowing where else to go. It had been days since he'd visited that place, but he had to know for sure. Why else would Michael be talking about the orb in the ship now? When Jason got there, he immediately saw the blue-silver ship where he'd first seen it. It was like it had never moved. Maybe it turned invisible, he thought. That was a crazy thought, and considering he had been 19 at the time, he felt himself too old for fantastical ideas. But he saw the ship then, upon his return to the field. There could be no denying something strange was going on. Could the ship possibly have belonged to aliens? Jason thought so, but where was the pilot now? He approached the ship and searched inside. It was night and hard to see, but he eventually found a small, dark red object under the seats, behind some kind of tool cart. It looked like a bowling ball without finger holes, but he knew better. He took it back to the house and said to Michael, "I found the orb." Michael awoke from his coma that very instant. And now, there he was, telling Les everything. Jason could hear through the glass, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they found the one who could power the orb. Michael had followed his senses to San Sebastian, like a magnet to metal. After getting to the city, though, he complained of interference from all the buildings surrounding them. He said it was like sound bouncing off walls. Michael couldn't pinpoint the exact location of the one with the other half of the mysterious mist that inhabited him. That half hadn't been in the jar, though, so there was no telling how the other person had gotten a hold of it. Michael had known from the dreams there was another half to this powerful mist. Maybe the other person, the one they were looking for, was the pilot of the ship. If telling Les everything helped them find their quarry faster, so be it. Jason decided he would speak to his brother the following morning. By then, Michael would have been punished enough. A little punishment was instrumental in the learning process, and if Jason didn't teach Michael, no one would.